Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, we're talking Alejandro Garnacho. How would he fit in at Chelsea? Then there's a 60 million euro centre forward that Premier League teams should be looking at, plus an Ajax striker they are, with Brian Brobbey linked to West Ham. Then we look at Rayan Cherki to Newcastle. We love the player, but is he worth the risk? That's all on today's episode. So we're back for another Wednesday edition of the Transfer Flow podcast, and I'm your host, Patrick Van Strassen. Today, I'm joined by Hayden Van Brewer. He's a veteran of data analytics in the MLS, also a veteran of the Joey Barton Fleetwood Town regime. I've also realized I'm about to get in trouble for saying the MLS, but it's good to have you here, Hayden. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me, Patrick. How are you doing?
I'm very well. It's great to have you here, especially today because you are an Ajax fan. You are an Ajax expert, especially relative to me, and we've got an Ajax player up today. But also, you've got a background in this, as does everyone at the Transfer Flow who isn't me. You've got a professional background in this area, and of course, transfer season. It's a really important time for us to talk about, edges, marginal gains, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think, especially as we get to the end of the transfer window, that's when players start to become available. Players that have been, kind of agitating for a move are trying to get that across the line if they're frustrated with playing time, looking to make those changes. And teams are looking to make those little additions, those little changes that, can really add up come the end of the year. I think especially we're talking about teams in those sort of Europa versus Conference League type spots that are looking to make a few extra points, can make a huge difference into, the off-season money that you get, the pull that you have next year. And for those teams, I think this window is super, super important.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, what you said there particularly rings true with our lineup today, because Cherki aside, all the players we're going to discuss are not guys who we expected to be available going into this January window. Top of that list being Alejandro Garnacho. So he seems like the sacrificial lamb. Manchester United have absolutely no financial wiggle room right now. They need to get some cash. He is an academy trainee, even though he isn't, fully an academy trainee. And so they can book him as pure profit. It looks like 50 to 60 million pounds, something like that. Napoli have been interested as a Kvaratskhelia replacement, but now Chelsea seem to be the leading candidates. Of course, Napoli could still happen. They were looking at Karim Adeyemi. He now looks to be staying in Dortmund. Garnacho, though, not 21 until the summer. He's coming up on 50 Premier League appearances. What's your take on the player?
Yeah, I think Garnacho is a player for his age, but even in general, like really tremendous explosive speed, a powerful runner that can hold people off. I think, you guys have talked about the player a good bit. He's a guy that can be a bit selfish in front of goal. He wants to get his own shots. He doesn't always pick the right final option there. Maybe shoots from a bit wide at times, but he's very direct. He's very strong. He's sort of a profile for a player that there's not many in his age group that are super as competitive as he is. And he looks like he could be, a real key player for Argentina for a long time. So I think for Man United, the question is fit, right? It's getting some finances in the door for Amorim to find the sort of 10 players in that box field, those number 10 players in that box midfield that really fit what he wants to do. He likes to have, we're seeing the Dorgu signing, if that goes through, speed and verticality from the wing backs, but then maybe some more playmaker types in the 10 roles where Garnacho wants to stretch the game. Rashford, another guy that wants to stretch the game. It looks like those players might be moved on, which again, could be the one that Man United regrets, a really top-end talent. It would be really interesting if it's Chelsea, because right now Jadon Sancho playing a lot in that left wing role. Jadon Sancho's profile is not a guy that stretches and runs the game in behind. He, is more than happy to let the fullback kind of come up behind him and take the width and be this sort of inside playmaker, even dropping deeper into, positions where you're going to see a center midfielder or something like that to, kind of control the tempo or something. A bit of very, very different profile from Garnacho. So yeah, a fan of the player. I think he's got some real athletic traits, and a team that's looking for a winger to stretch the game in behind, he could be a really good fit for.
Yeah, he's definitely in that category of kind of inside forward of it. I mean, I guess he does more ball carrying than that. He can zone move. He carries the ball into the penalty area an awful lot, but what's popped for him, right, is XG and his shots as well. He's just been getting shots really since he broke through. Like 3.5 shots a game is kind of crazy stuff for a guy on such a bad attacking team, and for a wide guy as well. He's not currently a creative passer, and you'd imagine that if he went to Napoli, certainly they would want him to be that. Of these two, then, do you lean towards Chelsea as the better fit?
I think there's a part of me that really likes the Napoli fit for the idea that, with him and Lukaku, you sort of have this very athletic dual threat in behind, and Conte then has the ability to continue to play his defensive block, absorb pressure, and then has another weapon to counter with, a different weapon to counter than Kvaratskhelia, who has such great ball control, and feels like he can dribble himself out of a closet. Garnacho's a little bit different, but I like it in a way that he's a different profile. I think he still adds to what they want to do. With Chelsea, I've still got some questions. Again, they're playing with Nico Jackson, who will stretch the game in behind, Cole Palmer, and maybe more of that free roll. Does that push too many numbers up the field and not enough sort of people moving towards the ball, especially when you have, wingers on the other side, someone like Nani Madueke, who's, wants to get on the ball, dribble, and take people on in the final third. If they're slowing the game down in that kind of way to give guys like him, Jadon Sancho, and Palmer the ball, then maybe there's not as natural a fit for Garnacho, who so far what we've seen is he thrives in these transition, these open breaks, open space, where he can run and be aggressive and take people on. So I think there's still a part of me that thinks the Napoli one, they've got cash to spend. He adds a threat that they clearly need. It's a little bit of a rejig, but maybe that one makes a bit more sense than the Chelsea one. Also, again, I think it's been said all year, Chelsea have such an abundance of players. It feels like,
Sure.
Their cup runneth over a little bit.
Yeah, I guess he gets a more central role if he goes to Napoli. I mean that kind of metaphorically. Like he's going to be a nailed on starter.
Yes.
He's going to be given a ton of responsibility, you'd imagine. And it would be a huge expenditure for Napoli. At Chelsea, though, you can imagine him being highly productive, because I guess all the creativity in the Chelsea side does kind of skew to the right. They've got creative right backs in James and Gusto. They've obviously got Cole Palmer, who kind of wants to go out to the right so that he can see the whole field. And you can imagine him ghosting in behind Jackson. That's pretty scary stuff. The question I have, though, is Ravi and I talked previously about the fact that Chelsea still look defensively a little bit suspect. They probably need to work on the press and be cutting off some of these attacks a little bit earlier on. How do you think that part of the game is for Garnacho? Because Chelsea have got one guy who's good enough that he's allowed to be a passenger defensively if he wants to, but you can't really manage more than one of these, and Madueke gets criticised for this as well. So I'm just wondering, what do you think of the kind of defensive side of Garnacho's play?
I think he's, for a young player, the first thing you kind of look for is an eagerness to do it, a player that's willing to it. I think he's someone that, if you look at his body of work with United, he's clearly improved in that way. I kind of watched when Liverpool went for Cody Gakpo, they went with a player that clearly had much more experience cutting off passing lanes and, playing even as a center forward, which he hadn't really done previously, that his understanding of the game and pressing shape and things like that were things he did. And I think Darwin Nunez has actually improved in that area, but that was sort of some of the conversation. I think with Garnacho, he's improved. I think he has a real willingness to do it. That being said, I don't think he's necessarily the strongest one right there. And so, yeah, it's sort of a question. I think, the more aggressive and vertical the press is, the higher up they're willing to go. I think that suits him. I think he's a player that wants to, really be aggressive and is comfortable, chasing and kind of showing that hunger and desire, and that it's less natural for him to be sort of shifting in sort of a more mid block press. Mm-hmm. And so that's something obviously that Chelsea sort of like to set up, that sort of 4-4-2 with Palmer and Jackson on the front before kind of really jumping and causing chaos. So I think it would still be a little bit of a learning curve initially for him going over there to Chelsea.
But that's the thing, right? They're getting a guy here who's not even 21 yet. He's probably 2-3 years pre-peak. Like this along with Colwill and Palmer and Jackson, this is the core of an incredibly good side. I wonder as well if it's a little bit easier for United to countenance a sale, given that I think he's got 4 goal involvements in the league this year. his expected goals and expected assists per 90 have gone up a bit, but his actual end product has gone down a little bit. And I wonder if it's kind of easier to sell your winger who only has 4 goal involvements in January than if he were, really flying.
Yeah, if United have whatever the crazy stat is on the longevity that they've had an academy player on every match day roster, right? So I think anytime you sell an academy player, anytime you sell a player that's on the Argentine national team with how good they've been the last couple of years, I think there's going to be question marks. The United fan base are one that are exasperated right now, and they don't want to miss out on, a player making that jump. I think that's something they're really scared of. And even though cashing in, they want to let Amorim, sort of do it. United have clearly, allowed him to fully change the system there. And there's going to be a desire for him to bring in players. It's sort of like, is this a necessary trade or, I think there's definitely going to be some worried United fans tossing and turning at night if Garnacho does go out the door, because, he clearly has some signal in there that he could be a top talent.
Yeah. So there's a part of this as well for Garnacho that's kind of what kind of player do I imagine myself being? You imagine that these clubs are going to have to try and sell him on a vision of how he's going to develop. That's going to be really interesting. But let's leave Garnacho behind then, because I want to move on to Ajax. So Ajax, historically, transfer windows, people are going to be knocking on your door. And this time, that maybe it's been a little bit easier recently because they haven't been as good. Though we've already seen Rensch go off to Roma. And now Brian Brobbey could be leaving as well. He's been linked to West Ham. Supposedly they're quibbling over fee. I think Ajax wants something like 35 million euros, including add-ons. This is the reported fee, but who knows? And West Ham, as they have done every window since the beginning of recorded time, want a striker. Brobbey is about to turn 23. He was at Ajax. He was great. He went to Leipzig. He didn't play. He went back to Ajax. He's great again. You've been following this player for a long time. So what's your take on the kind of shape of his career?
Yeah, I mean, Broby's a player that is clearly, his athleticism is so superlative. He used to dominate the academy age groups. He used to dominate in for playing for young Ajax for the second team. And, he's so powerful and strong, wrestling grown men to the ground. Just, great physical strength. And faster, I think, than he looks. And obviously playing in Ajax Academy, he's a footballer with a lot of knowledge of the game and that kind of thing. And he's someone who you sort of, every year you're like, he's really that young still. Like he feels like he's been around for forever, and it hasn't been sort of the easiest path for him. He's playing in an Ajax team right now that have a number of different striking options without Weghorst, Chuba Akpom, all kind of different types of strikers. And with Leipzig, he didn't really find a fit. I think he's a player that is looking for some love. He's looking for an opportunity. He's scored goals at all levels when he's played. The question is sort of like, is West Ham the place that can really, give him a platform? West Ham has been in the endless pursuit of replacing Michail Antonio, who's a player that obviously has offensive output, but also incredible value for them as a sort of pressure relief outlet to get out of their own sort of low block, and also as a player with really high defensive output. And, Sebastian Haller, Skamaka, these are sort of players of different molds that had great careers before and after West Ham. And I think that's the fear for West Ham, is can this be a guy that has the really outstanding superlative traits to help us get out of the back and maybe give us a little more offense like Antonio? Or is he going to be one of these players that ends up being a mismatch? I would actually lean towards the former. I actually could see it happening. I think Nottingham Forest are looking maybe for something else for Chris Wood, as a powerful, strong physical outlet. I think Brobbey can do that for some of these clubs. We'll see if the pricing ends up making sense for them, but he went to Leipzig on a free, so Ajax are definitely looking to collect a fee here.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, his numbers are as good as you could hope. Like, it's always one of those things, right, where in the Eredivisie is not the strongest defensively. So if you're going to buy a forward from there, you kind of want their numbers to be obscene, and his numbers are obscene. He's got 42 goal involvements in 45 90s I've got over the last 2 full seasons before this. He's even this season where, he's significantly underperforming his expected goals, but his expected goals are still really, really solid. This is like a zero 0.9 per 90 expected goals and assists per 90 player, which is very funny. With Potter, it feels like it could be an okay fit, right? Because there are some creative players around there. There's Paquetá, there's Somerville, there's Kudus. They've generally, Potter sides, not West Ham, been good at manufacturing high value chances for their centre forward. Like that should benefit him, right?
Yeah, I think, if you talk to myself and other Ajax fans, the kind of area of Broby's game that still leaves a little to be desired is maybe the finishing or the final pass. He's a guy that creates so much havoc with his presence, and puts himself in the position to be missing some of these chances or missing some of these final passes. So, again, a little bit of work there. Can he do it? Again, if any young player can make the jump from the Eredivisie to the Premier League, this is clearly a pretty different athletic profile than most of the guys. Obviously, he's been bullying people in the Eredivisie for a number of seasons, but this is a pretty different athletic profile than your average, sort of skinny technical guy coming out of the Netherlands. This is a guy with some real powerful traits. And yeah, this West Ham team is an interesting one. You sort of have the giants in midfield with Soucek and Alvarez, but then you do have with Paquetá, with Kudus, and even with Bowen, you have players that can score goals, can make things happen in tight spaces, and might really do well playing off of a Brian Brobbey, a platform, someone that can sort of give them maybe some more central shots, allow them to come in from those half spaces and create something. So yeah, I think there's definitely a way that it can work, and I'm sure for West Ham's recruitment team and Graham Potter, that's definitely what they're thinking about here.
Yeah, you're right about his physicality. He's one of those guys who, when you watch him play, and then you look up his height, you think that cannot possibly be right. He just
Yeah.
seems bigger than he actually is, but he's very broad and he uses his body well, backing into defenders. He's got kind of all the athletic stuff you want. What do you think? Do you have an idea of what maybe didn't work for him with Leipzig? Because that seems a very strange one.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't really have a good answer for it. I actually, when that move happened, obviously gutted that Ajax weren't able to get a fee, but that was something that made a lot of sense to me. He had played in a team that liked to have a lot of possession, that can be at times slower and methodical. And so I was like, okay, this physical guy might just need a lot of reps in the chaos, 1v1 isolation transition, second striker, maybe to take off some of the finishing burden. And it just didn't really happen. And the only thing I can kind of point to was with Houston Clauvert going there as well. Again, a player that we've seen sort of, have a later than expected breakout season with Bournemouth this year. He also didn't really find it a great fit with that Leipzig team, a player that also looked like he on paper had some of the traits that might do better in a high pressing transition kind of system. At times. So I can't speak to it. It might just be something where some of the Ajax coaching and the things that these players are thinking about just doesn't quite line up with some of those, kind of Red Bull ideas or the way that those teams played. But yeah, I would say I have the same sort of questions. A player that ended up not getting as many opportunities as I think he really would have hoped there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think he'll get them at West Ham. He's Michail Antonio. It feels like he's been on the way out for a long time. Full clue, I don't think any of us really liked that move, and it's worked out pretty much exactly as we thought it might. Should we move on from him to a forward who could be on his way out of the Bundesliga? I wanted to ask you about Victor Boniface today, because he was obviously a huge part of Leverkusen's title win last season. He ended up with 22 goal involvements, 18 non-penalty goal involvements in the Bundesliga in like 1790s. So he played kind of half the minutes, but got a ton of goals and assists. Now, supposedly, Al Nassr want to bring him to Saudi and make him one of the highest paid players in Saudi, which is saying something. And reportedly, Leverkusen are kind of willing to deal around the 60 million euro mark, 50 to 60 million euro mark. Is this surprising to you? Because he's had his injury problems, but when you look at his output when it's on the field, it's kind of hard to imagine it being better, really.
Yeah, for me, it kind of the one it made me think about is sort of how well Newcastle have done with Alexander Isak. A player that there was maybe some injury concerns with, a player that had some maybe a little bit up and down, but like clear upside, clear number 9 profile, clearly a player that you thought, he'll be able to score goals at this level. Again, Isak, what he's done this year is maybe beyond that. But Boniface, I think, is a striker that I think you would see the same kinds of things. This is a guy that you can imagine coming into, top team, a team that's playing in Europa League, even again has been playing in Champions League, and be a real difference maker. I don't know what it looks like internally, but you imagine he would have been on the mix for players that Spurs would have been looking at when they signed Dominic Solanke. So it's not hard to see him going to a team like that, and having him. Saudi is the only suitors, or alleged that that's sort of how I've seen so far, is definitely surprising. I don't know if that's something to do with what kind of salary he's looking to demand after helping Leverkusen secure their title last year, but clearly a player with a lot of upside, a lot of talent, a good age. Definitely think that there's a lot of teams that could use a player like him.
Yeah, I mean, he's 6'3", he's fast. He only just turned 24. His shots are hilarious. I mean, last year it was like 4.4 shots a game. This season it's up over 5. But he's played 46% of the available minutes for Leverkusen over the last 18 months. He was a big dribbler last year. This year, not so much, admittedly in limited minutes. This and Osimhen, they're guys who have got incredible track records, when they're on the field. Do you think, though, the market has been generally getting warier of players with spotty injury histories, though? Because in the past, you'd imagine that a team would say, we can fix him and he's worth this kind of risk. Now it feels like the fact Osimhen didn't get a big move and Boniface might only have Saudi suitors, that seems like a kind of sea change in the market.
Yeah, I think it has to be something like that. I mean, again, as a fan, wanting some of these top teams to take a risk, because I would love to see Boniface, I would love to see Osimhen into the Premier League. I think I want to see these guys go up against top physical defenders and really try to compete, because they've with Osimhen was so incredible that season for Napoli, just really special. Boniface with Leverkusen, these are guys that are having some of the best striker seasons outside of Lewandowski and Kane in the last 5 or 10 years. These are, really guys with potential. And, it's a very different change in approach. We're seeing, Man United playing with Rasmus Højlund and Joshua Zirkzee. I think players that are younger, that you have a profile that you think can be molded to fit a very specific team structure, guys that are maybe, very specific to the role. And again, I think theoretically have less injury sort of troubles, or less serious injury troubles. But I think the top end talent for Boniface, for Osimhen, I'm not sure if it's a market wariness, or if it's a fear of over investing too much in that sort of position. Again, I'm not sure exactly what some of these guys are demanding. And obviously, once you hear that Saudi's getting involved, you're hearing the salary that a guy like Neymar got paid to not play, to just kind of hang out and rehab. Maybe that's the one variable here that is sort of not in the mix. But if it's something else, you have to imagine top teams are really considering, is this the guy that could push us over the edge?
Yeah, and it feels like for this kind of price, if a big European club came in and were offering still really big wages, you've got to imagine he'd be at least slightly tempted. I mean, the Saudi money might be insane, but as somebody who's worked, in club analytics, what kind of have there been times where something has been showing up in a player's physical data that's meant you've started to have concerns about them? Ted and Ravi have both talked in the past about, a player's trending and physical concerns, and how in that situation you might want to try and move them on. What does that look like for a pro, and how does that conversation go with the club?
Yeah, so I mean, Ted's quote is always one that I've even used myself, which is age curves are real, and
Sure.
that is something that some players are able to adapt their game, but some of the things that those players are able to do, the ability to repeatedly hit high sprint speeds and things like that. If a player is really reliant on their game, and those are things that are starting to decline, that's a real concern. If a player is not able to do the high intensity running without the ball that they used to be able to do, that's a real question. And some of those things are things that you're able to see, not necessarily just with the game by game physical outputs of a player, but when you have all of the data that they're doing in training, when you're able to see not just their, intensity and running day to day in training, what their weekly loading has looked like over the past 2 years, but also what is their output on other technologies, other physical testing, groin squeeze, force plate. I think the sports science component and sort of the intersection of those two is definitely something that hopefully teams are more wary of and taking seriously. And when you have a player internally, you have so much more information to be able to sort of make that decision, to understand that trending, to understand how much sort of power or longevity that set a player back. And I think one of the big questions nowadays is with players playing really high level soccer, either earlier because of academy or because of getting up to first team, men's football and then being loaned out, that, a guy that's 30 could already have had a 14-year career, or a guy that's 28 could have already had, sort of 11, 12 years on their legs, compared to maybe someone that is more of a late developer or something like that. So I think teams are definitely trying to get wary of that and understand, look, this guy's actually still been good this year, but like he's actually been declining for the last sort of 12 months. And we think that's going to keep continuing. At some point, he's just going to cross that threshold where, because of the lower work rate, because he's not able to hit the speeds that he was doing, that all of a sudden he's just going to go from 6 goal involvements and, still contributing each game to just getting below that threshold where the average opponent that he's up against can just, keep a hold of him. He can't quite get away. He can't quite get that pass off that he used to. And all of a sudden that output really drops off. And you need to, once that happens, you're stuck with a player that, from a financial usage is really hurting you. And you need to try to get out of that before that happens. And so, when you're dealing with those players internally, you have that information. And maybe teams are a little bit more scared of that risk, or, are needing that information before they take a risk on a player like that.
Well, I mean, maybe that's part of what's going on with someone like Rashford. Like, Barcelona are supposedly interested, but you look at him and you think, this guy's 27, so in theory should still have something left to give. But I was looking at the matches played for him in his career, and he's got nearly 200 more career matches to his name than someone like Dominic Solanke, who's the same age. And you think that's like 4 seasons.
That's exactly what I'm talking about here. Like, that's a really different one. And, to the public, they're still going to say, it's sort of the Ross Barkley joke. Ross Barkley was a young player until he turned 30, right? Somehow he just sort of had that maybe appearance or something like that. And there's real minutes getting put on their legs. I think, Ted and Ravi talked about that with Kobie Mainoo, right? That this is a guy like, don't put 40 matches on this kid's legs every single season until he's 22, because then he's not going to be able to give you sort of the expected peak output when he's 23, 24, because simultaneously as you're putting these sort of miles on a person's legs, theoretically, they're also still learning and improving. We see that some of the expected pass modeling, that players do continue to get better at their, line breaking passes and their understanding of the game into their late 20s. And so to access the player when they're really peaking and have that understanding of the game and the physical output, that's super desirable. And it's important that if you're bringing players through, that you don't miss out on that opportunity with them.
Sure. Yeah. I'm thinking about that. It is a kind of market opportunity, right? And when you and I think we were probably getting into football analytics like around the same time, like 2013 kind of time. Back then, young players were this huge market opportunity, right? Because certainly in England, there was the narrative of, well, what's this player worth if they haven't won something, and experience is the most valuable thing, blah, blah, blah. And so young players could be kind of had for a steal. Now we've obviously seen the market shift more towards young players. Do you think that over the next few years we can expect that older players will start to become a kind of value proposition for smart clubs? I'm thinking of Liverpool signing Wataru Endo, when after getting priced out of the Caicedo thing, it felt like they said, well, this is a place where we can get more value than you would expect because he is an older player. Do you imagine that might happen as age curves or as people become more aware of age curves?
Yeah, I think it's almost outside of the age curve, and it has a lot to do with some of these players that have taken unbelievable care of themselves. I think of someone like Tom Brady, leaving New England and Bill Belichick and still able to win a Super Bowl right around the age of 40. Like, that's a really incredible one. I think of how good Thiago Silva was for Chelsea. I think Thiago Silva is probably the player that a handful of teams or sporting directors or coaches said like, yeah, he's still good for us right now, but we're worried that in a year or two. And like, that guy went and saved Fluminense and is playing still in the first division in Brazil. Like there are really special players and athletes that don't want to give it up. I think obviously Turkey is not the same level as the Premier League, but seeing what Edin Dzeko and Dusan Tadic was doing for Ajax. I mean, Dusan Tadic has been such an incredible player, maybe in that Eric Choupo-Moting, that one where maybe a lot of British soccer fans see him as, he was at Stoke City or something like that, or Dusan Tadic, he was at Southampton. It's like, these are guys that had significant years playing across, top leags in Europe for a long time. So I think that's definitely, there's definitely value to be there. One of the things, and I'll give a shout out to Ravi here. One of the things that Ravi always said is take a look wherever people are not, that's where there's an opportunity to gain the most edge. So if everyone's looking at young players, then there will be an edge to gain in, players at the top. And if everyone's looking at, let's say, South American players, because Endrick and Rodrigo Goes and some of these players have come from there, then that's a chance to look to Asia or to look to Africa or look in these different places. And I think, going where someone is not and then figuring out what is actually the edge here is kind of the process that hopefully the really smart teams are taking advantage of. Maybe the more recent trend of that has been the sort of kick up in Japanese players. And you're seeing the value that maybe a team like Celtic got out of bringing in players from Japan and Korea, maybe before some of the other people realized how much development has gone on in those countries and how talented some of the individuals are. So I think going where things aren't, and the age one is a perfect example.
It's so funny that football people who love football always love to brag about it as a kind of global sport, but there are still just these areas of the globe that football has basically ignored. I mean, I guess quite often for racist reasons or for economic reasons or whatever it might be. It feels like there's still so much to discover there. That's really exciting stuff. Shall we talk then about a player who is a known quantity, though, before we wrap up today, which is Rayan Cherki? He's on the market like everyone at Lyon is on the market. Lyon are in need of sales. Not only Lyon, but the whole kind of umbrella corporation above them is really hurting for money at the moment. And Rayan Cherki is, I think it's fair to say, like the most talented player there. He's a kid. He's been doing obscene things for a while there now. And now he's linked to Newcastle. 21 years old, can play as an attacking midfielder, can play on either wing. What do you think of this? Because he's always one of those guys where he's almost like two players. When he's on the field, very easy to enjoy. When he's off the field, apparently difficult. But even on the field, I think there are some question marks, especially coming to the Premier League, especially coming to Newcastle.
Yeah, a player with such high technical quality. I think you watch him, and he's a throwback to the Barclaysman trend that was all over social media. A player that so creative that felt like doesn't necessarily look like the modern athlete that's 0% body fat and doesn't care about anything. Like he looks like a player that goes out and really enjoys himself on the pitch and can make things happen. For Newcastle, it would be a shift. I mean, they converted Joelinton as a, 40 million pound or whatever they paid for him as a striker into a midfielder to do the hard work and the graft and battle. And, Cherki is a player that, if you're imagining Newcastle does really well, where they're able to be defensively resilient and then utilize Anthony Gordon, had been using Almiron, speed to stretch the game in that kind of way, that against teams that might start to try to sit in that against them a little bit more, Cherki could be the player to unlock things for them. I think in that sense, you can see it working. The question is it too many resources for a player that, maybe doesn't provide all of the defensive things that Newcastle look for? I mean, playing Murphy, Gordon, Joelinton, Guimaraes, Tonali. Clearly, Eddie Howe is a guy that really values work rate. And, does Eddie Howe's system have room for a guy to sort of, do things a little bit more off the cuff and take a little more risk in possession and be a little bit more casual out of possession? I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but clearly a very interesting player.
Yeah, he's one of those guys who would be amazing to have on the bench in the last 20 minutes of the game when you needed something, because like you say, that his ability to pick locks is astonishing. He's passing into the penalty area constantly, tons of expected goals and assists. And right now they are very reliant on Gordon and Guimaraes to do most of their ball progression, right? You've got those two guys lead the team in passing the ball into the penalty area, but are way ahead of everybody else. Gordon's doing most of the ball carrying. Cherki does help with all of that. And also, I guess there's also the part of me that thinks, if you look at the output they got out of Almiron that one season, that they're getting out of Jacob Murphy currently, you think, I don't love either of those players. I don't think they're like super talented players, though they're Premier League footballers. If they had, a super talent there, then I wonder what they could produce. But it does just feel like this could maybe be a weak point in the press. And right now, the defense is doing so well that it feels like a risk to introduce such an unreliable element.
Yeah, I think there's the alternative for Newcastle is probably sitting still until the summer or something like that. They've been good, they've been robust. They probably don't want to. They might not want to overstretch themselves in this window before the summer, but at the same time, especially with a guy like Aleksander Isak, a player that I think is always looking to receive the ball in feet to get a shot in the box, to just be on the last shoulder of a defender. Cherki could be a guy that really services him in a really good way. So I think that partnership is going to be what they're looking at. And, obviously there's a desire from Lyon to sell. They just sold Said Benrahma, I believe, to the Saudi second division, which is still incredible to me that that's something happening. But yeah, I think, if there's a desire to get that deal done and the price can be right, I think I'm probably more on the side of like, there's a risk worth taking here for a team like Newcastle, that there could be an extra ingredient either at the end of the games or rotating the squad, as they continue to be hopefully a mainstay in European competition, that may be adding that extra element. There's a risk worth taking there. Again, the off the field stuff, the locker room stuff, that's something Newcastle's going to have to decide for themselves through speaking with the player and reference checking and that kind of thing. But again, I think from the profile of the player, from what we've seen, and just in my head, the combination with Aleksander Isak, it feels like that's a real friend for Isak. That's a player he'd really like to play with. That gives him a little something different, and just in and around the box, just gets him a few more touches and a few more opportunities to score, which it feels like he won't stop taking.
Yeah, and it'd be nice when you've got such good runners to have somebody there who's taking some of the passing burden of Guimaraes, who does have kind of some special sauce. If you had to pick any club, though, if you could pick any club to put Cherki at, who do you think is the right kind of fit for this kind of player? Because, like you say, there's the kind of Dimitri Payet quality of him where you're kind of like, is it better that he's the superstar on a team that's not so good, where they can kind of carry him? Maybe he's not as effective on a super club where everything doesn't go through him.
Yeah, again, it's a really tough balance. I mean, it's a player that's linked to top teams like Borussia Dortmund, and at the same time, there's a part of me in my head that says, like, is he a guy that could have been the Olise replacement at Crystal Palace? Or, if Tottenham Hotspur didn't have James Maddison, is he a player that I would kind of see slotting in there? And none of those are really are maybe as sexy or appealing as Dortmund or even Newcastle, right? I mean, this is a Newcastle team that was playing PSG and AC Milan to some really fierce battles in the Champions League just a year ago. So, I guess I'm leaning more towards, I can see it happening with Newcastle, but if not, then there's certainly other suitors, but they're maybe not the Manchester Cities and Liverpools of the world. They're again, being a real creative playmaker on a team that is crying out for a little bit of top end talent or flavor to make something happen for them.
Yeah, it'd be a nice different tool for Newcastle to have. And kind of, I guess sometimes I forget as well, that Eddie Howe was that Bournemouth manager where everybody attacked and no one really defended, and they were a real technical ability kind of side. I think we've raced through the docket today. Is there any transfer that you'd like to talk about before we go? Anything that's caught your eye? Any interesting player who you think it might be good for our listeners and viewers to keep an eye on as the season goes on?
Yeah, I think the one transfer that I saw recently that really caught my attention was Gronbaek going to Southampton. I think it's a loan through the end of the season from France. He was a player that really stood out for Bodo and Glint, playing in European competition, obviously in the domestic league. He'd been linked to MLS, I think to Charlotte as sort of a DP, athletic playmaker, player with some great shot quality. Did really well when they played against Ajax in European competition. So he's a player that I think is really interesting. A little bit of a swing for Southampton that, it might be a little too late in terms of adding another playmaker, and a very different sort of playmaker type to Sulemana, who's, such a great dribbler, a player that sort of has some of those 10 or winger Mohamed Kudus kind of traits. I think with Gronbaek, you're getting a player that wants to get into the box, get good shooting locations, play really dangerous crosses to the back post. And I'm kind of curious. I think Southampton are a team that does have some individuals. Fernandez there, Dibbling. There are some pieces there that are really interesting. And I don't know exactly what effect that will have through the end of the year. But I'm really curious for a team taking a bigger swing than I expected in January.
Yeah, if there's an option to buy on that, it would be really, really interesting. But they've continued to do that during this. They brought in Sugawara in the summer as well, which I think was a really interesting signing at right back. It would be nice if they had something to enjoy in the back half of the season, because I do not think that they're staying in the league.
Yeah.
That's a really exciting one. Okay, well, I think that brings us to a close for today. Thank you very much for listening or watching. Make sure that you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. Hayden, before we go, where can people find you if they'd like to hear more of your expertise on the game?
Yeah, my socials are easy. I'm H Van Brewer on Twitter, or X now, I guess, and Blue Sky. I'm on both, and mostly just soccer analytics stuff. You can expect to see the same stuff there. Ajax and soccer analytics.
And you're part of the slow Dutchification of the transfer flow here. We're only going to accept people from now on with Vans and Durs and
need more Van surnames back in the national team with the V and the little point. I mean, I feel like with Van Dijk does Virgil now, and it feels like the Dutch national team when it had Van Persie and Van Bronckhorst and Van Nistelrooy and all of that. That was really the heyday. So I'm hoping we return to that at some point.
Agreed. Oh, I mean, that you kind of have got to throw back there, because at least there's still like a Klauffert in the team,
Right. That's the one thing, keeping the history together a little bit.
Exactly. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being on today. It was really fascinating to hear from you, and it's always interesting for me as an amateur to talk to a pro. Thank you very much again for listening and watching, and we will catch you next week when the window will be coming to a close. I think our next podcast will be on transfer deadline day. So if you see any interesting stories, let us know and we'll endeavor to cover them. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.